Thanks for joining us for our Pull Up a Chair podcast. I believe this is episode 3. My name is Ryan Smallwood. I'm the lead pastor here at Aldersgate Church, and today my guest is Nathan Teeters, who's also our college pastor here, but you'll get to hear more about him in just a second. And Pull Up a Chair is designed to talk about topics that the church is often hesitant to talk about. And let me remind you as we begin the podcast that the thoughts that are shared here today may not express my thoughts or those of Aldersgate Church. But let me also remind you that even though we may not all think alike, we can all love alike. And so, Nathan, it's good to have you on the podcast with us today. So Nathan Teeters again. Man, we are so excited here at Aldersgate that you come on board as our college pastor, and we can talk a little bit more about that, but then also Nathan Teeters Ministry. And so, man, just give a shout out. Tell us a little bit about what's happening with Nathan Teeters Ministry in 2020.
Well, thanks for letting me. I feel like we're on a talk show. So thanks for bringing me on. So I've been traveling full time for the past 5 years. Mainly doing student events. Love doing it. Started off doing some small stuff, and now it's getting to grow, and I still do some small things, and but just love students, love the energy behind it.
You've been here several times with our students.
Yes,
our
sir.
Students have gotten to know you well,
Yeah.
and but I know you travel a lot of different places across the nation, really.
Yeah, got to go to Canada, so
Canada.
that officially made me an international.
Now you're an
speaker.
International speaker.
So I wouldn't put that on my website. Travel. I will do international stuff. So
hey, these days, anytime you can cross the border, that's a win,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's
Because,
right.
I mean, that's not happening very much. So tell us a little bit about what's happened with Nathan Teeters Ministry due to COVID and 2020.
My whole summer, whenever this first happened, got totally canceled, and then
which I'm assuming was booked.
It was completely
booked
booked.
solid.
And so that got canceled, and then when it looked like things were going to open back up a little bit, we rescheduled it again, and then it all got canceled again. And so I ended up doing 2 camps, which I was very thankful for, because I know a lot of people they didn't get rescheduled. Yeah. And so, it is what it is. I've booked a couple events this past week for 2021 if we make it there. So
we're all looking forward to flipping that calendar from December to January. Like there's something magical about that, but still looking forward to the new year. So, and in the meantime, I guess we introduced you, or we entered into a conversation with you, and through prayer introduced you as the college pastor here at Aldersgate. And so you're doing that on a part-time basis for us, so you can still continue with Nathan Teeters Ministry and travel internationally.
Yeah, international travel.
Wherever you go.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the college ministry here and the vision for the college ministry here.
So it's been interesting, because going from traveling and doing events to pastoring is totally different. So preaching and pastoring are just two different things. One of the perks of getting to travel was I was getting to preach. This is different. It's on the ground. It's more like farming, definitely. But God's been faithful. It's been really cool to see over the past 5 years making relationships with students, not knowing that those students were going to launch this college ministry with me. And so that first night, whenever we said we're going to do it, I didn't know if anybody was going to come. And it was literally when the people started showing up, it was just relationships with students that I've created over the past 5 years. So that's been really cool. That just shows how God uses those seasons that you don't even know how he's working things out. He's working things out maybe for something different. And so it's going great, man. We got some crazy stories, some great stories. I know some people wanting to get baptized and things like that, but it's going great.
Yeah. We'll circle back around with you on that sometime and talk about some of the stories that are happening through the college ministry. You've got a great core group of people who are already very familiar with you, and but it's been exciting to see new people come in the process and get to hear some of their stories and their things, and just I just can't. I mean, I'm already excited about what's happening, but I'm looking forward to what's coming as well. So really glad to have you on board with us. So, so let's just jump in today. You're a very, you travel because you're a very gifted preacher. By the way, I like your illustration about farming. There's a big difference between being a preacher and being a pastor. You're a very gifted preacher, very gifted speaker. You connect really well with everyone, especially students. I've heard you preach several times, and sometimes in your preaching, I hear you allude to or refer to some struggles that you've had over the years with mental illness.
Yes, sir.
I've even heard you tell a little bit about a suicidal ideation, and just your struggles in that area. And the reason we brought you onto the podcast today is just to let you speak to us a little bit about that. Again, this Pull Up a Chair podcast was designed to talk about issues that the church sometimes skirts away from, not because we don't want to deal with it. It's just sometimes we don't even know how to deal with it, really.
Right.
And so, but I know that this is part of your story, and so I really appreciate you being willing to come on the podcast today to talk to us about that story, to open up and be vulnerable about it, because I know that's not easy. But I also know that what you have to share is going to be very valuable for a lot of people today, and listening to this podcast. And so, with that, I'll just open it up to you. And so, tell us in your own words a little bit about your own struggle in this area, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. This is something I'm always happy to talk about. I think that sometimes there's a stigma and gloominess around it. Like we don't need to talk about it, but I think any chance I get to, whenever I'm preaching, get to share that part of my story, it always opens up doors for people who are struggling with the same thing. And
have you run up against closed doors? Well, if you go into a lot of different places and speak, have you ever had anyone tell you you can't talk about suicide, or
not in those words, but I've had people afterwards kind of say, "Hey, that we should probably stay away from that." Because I'm gentle with knowing what the crowd is. So if it's a bunch of 13-year-olds, I'm not going to give really deep details. But I think once they see the fruit of people coming to the altar and saying, "I struggle with it too," then that's powerful. But I hadn't got a lot of pushback on it. So I just remember even younger, I'm a big feeler. And so lots of times you walk into a room and you can just kind of feel something's off. Wake up in the morning, something's weird. And so I've always been that way. I remember, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago. I remember it was the second grade was my very first experience with some dark thoughts. And as a second grader, you think, what in the world? I just had this thought in my head that wasn't of me. And so I can remember this going on for a long time. I had to move from Lamesa to Big Spring. That was going into my freshman year. That really, I didn't transition well out of that. I missed my friends. I didn't have new friends. Went through a lot of weird stuff that first month of school. And so September 11th, 2001, had nothing to do with the day. It just happened to be the day that I decided, I don't want to do this anymore, and attempted suicide. And
and remind me, how old were you at that point, or at that time?
13, 14.
So a teenager.
Yes, sir. Yeah. And thankfully it didn't work. I'm here.
Thankfully, thank goodness.
But I just remember waking up the next morning knowing there should have not been a way I was awake. And waking up, and I remember vividly having a conversation with God where God just said, you got a purpose. I know you have a lot of pain. I know you're hurting, but you have a purpose. You have a plan. And so I said, okay, I'm in it. And from that point on, never struggled with suicide again. There's nothing within me that thinks that's an option anymore. But the depression kind of stuck, and went through seasons of just feeling that depression. And I think there's a difference between sadness and depression. And everyone gets sad, but this depression is like it gets in your soul. It kind of latches onto you. I think that some people can go through depression based off of something bad happening, like a traumatic experience, and depression is the result. I've never had that. My life has been fine. My parents are great parents, grew up in a Christian home, was in church all the time. So it wasn't anything like that, but I think that's why it made it so frustrating for me, because I couldn't pinpoint how to fix it. I would look at it and say, man, I'm just feeling this way and there's no reason for me to feel like this. And so I went to some counselors and got some help, got put on some medication just to kind of take the edge off, which I'm a proponent for. Sometimes the miracle's a medicine, right? I think that seeking help like that is a win. But it was just seasons of depression, and I'd go into it and out of it. I had two really big episodes after that. One was after a pretty bad breakup for me, and then another one just hit me after Christmas a couple years ago. Just driving, and it just got in my soul. Nothing happened, and it was just 7 days of just fighting and fighting and fighting. Thankfully now, I've gone through it enough. I know how to fight. And I think that was the biggest difference, was I didn't know how to do things to fix it. But now I know helpful ways and things like that kind of make it easier. And I know how to handle or manage it a little better than I used to.
Well, again, thanks for being willing to share your story, your personal journey. And we definitely want to get to the how to fight stage. But can you back up just a little bit and tell us dark days, being in those spots, like for someone who doesn't understand depression, what's that like? And I mean, it may be different for everyone, but for you, what's that dark time like?
It really is, and maybe this is a bad way of putting it. It's just gloomy. Everything is dark. You don't want to talk to people. You don't not want to talk to people. You don't want to get out of bed. You don't want to lay in bed. You're just in this thing where you just can't. You can't find joy. And this is something I want to talk about, and we can do this later. But the difference between joy and happiness, right? You can find happiness, but the joy is really what you're looking for in depression, because happiness fades. And so just those seasons of not being able to find joy, not wanting to do anything. Knowing what to do and just not wanting to do it.
And if I heard you right, you said that these episodes that you've experienced may not be triggered by anything.
Right.
Like, so there wasn't an event, there wasn't a circumstance, or like you just began to feel this gloominess or this way. I think that's important for people to. I think sometimes we feel like it has to be situational, but I think what I hear you saying is it's not necessarily situational.
Yes, sir.
And I think that's what people who don't struggle with mental illness don't get is, how can you be this way? There's nothing happening in your life. Your life is great. Like you said, everything's great for you. Everything's going your way. How can you feel this way?
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and go back and circle back to the joy and happiness thing, because I think that's a great conversation to have.
I just think those are two totally different words, total different meanings. I think the world wants happiness and will do anything to get it. But the problem with happiness is it fades. And so I can get something and it makes me happy, but that's only going to last for a little bit. Joy is everlasting, right? And so that's become from preacher to preacher, our worldview is Jesus's joy. Right. You can find joy in every season. We understand that joy is a person. Happiness, you need more. Joy says you're enough. All right. So happiness, I need more of this. I need more of that. I need this and that. And joy is, no, in every season, whether good or bad, I can have joy because I have Jesus. I read on a billboard, it was like a drive-through, go pick your beer up. Well, I don't know what those are called. But on
we're preacher to preacher, we don't know.
But on their sign it said, happiness is found in the bottom of a bottle. And I remember driving and I was thinking, what an interesting quote. And then I felt like God said, they're right. You could find happiness, you just can't find joy. And joy is that thing that sustains me. And joy, as cliche as this is, joy is a choice. I can choose to be joyful in every circumstance because it's not dependent on what I have. It's dependent on who has me and who is in the situation with me. Right. Understanding that I'm not in this alone. I say this all the time and people think I'm joking, that my favorite Bible verse is Jesus wept. I think it is the most powerful, one of the most powerful scriptures because we serve a Jesus that felt, that empathizes and sympathizes with us. And so that lets me know, man, I'm not alone. I'm not alone in this, because joy is with me, not because happiness is.
Wow. Yeah, that's so good. So finding joy in the middle of some of those gloomy times. So can you elaborate on that a little bit for us?
Yeah, I think that there's like some things go-to things for me that can help me kind of get out of that funk and back into joy is I just don't sit in it. That's I think our biggest people who struggle with it the most. I just find they're sitting in it instead of moving through it, walking through it. Even though I'll walk through the valley of the shadow of death, go through it. So finding helpful ways, finding helpful things to do. One of those things for me is I tell somebody about it. For the past 8 years, that's been my wife. She's my biggest fighter for me in that area. It's usually just a text because usually when I'm in that spot, I don't want to talk. I'm not likely going to go up to her and say, hey, I'm depressed today. So it's usually a text. Hey, I need your prayer today. And she knows, okay, it's a hard day for him. But talking about it gets you out of that. I think there's maybe some practical things like, for me, exercising gets me out of it. But the only time I exercise is when I'm depressed. So if you ever see me working out, just start praying for me, man, because he's in it. But going outside, just not sitting in that situation. I think those can be some helpful things.
Yeah, I think those are so key. How do you, like in the middle of it, how do you find the motivation to do those things? Like, is this something that like you said, you text your wife? Is this something that you have to know before you find yourself in one of those gloomy times? Like, is that something you have to have a plan ahead of time, or how do you motivate yourself to do that in the middle of it?
Sometimes I can feel it coming on, and I've just learned now to fight it. So if I feel those things coming on, I feel those temptations to retreat and to isolate, then I'll tell her and we can fight it. But one of the big things God told me, this was 2 years ago, was really shifting my perspective on how I view my depression. And it's not, like I said, it's not a constant thing. It gets better every day, and I'm so thankful for that. But this was something that he told me a couple years ago. He said, for every trial, I want you to see a table. So when you're in that middle of that depression, understand I'm setting up a table because I'm there with you. A table with you in the presence of your enemies, a table that, because I'm always with you, I'm always here. I'm not a God that is outside of it trying to get you through it. I'm in it with you, carrying you through it. That is a constant source of joy, right? That's a constant source of joy to be able to understand this has a purpose. But the purpose is to go through it. I've learned things in my depression that I would have never learned if I hadn't gone through it. Do I think God gave me that depression? Absolutely not. It's from the devil. But guess who healed it? Jesus, right? So there's lessons that I've learned going through it that I would have never learned without going through it.
Yeah, so much richness there. Especially in terms of learning in the valley. That's typically where we do most of our learning. But your comment on we don't stay there, we pass through it, so powerful. The time we're airing this podcast, we're heading into the holiday season. and this is not really a normal holiday season. We're heading into a holiday season in a year that's just been full of craziness. And COVID this year, what we're hearing is just the rates of mental illness are skyrocketing, depression, anxiety going through the roof. Suicide, I listened to a report on the radio the other day where suicide rates are up 30% right now. And that is heading into a holiday season where we know most of those things tend to go up and escalate. So, man, my heart is just heavy right now for people who are suffering. And I wonder if you could just shed a little light. You've been really good to tell us some things that you can do when you find yourself in that place. Can you shed a little light on people who may feel like they're the only one that's dealing with this, or they're the only one who feels this way, or the only one struggling with this right now? Yeah,
I think that's the biggest tactic of the enemy, is to make you think you're alone. I think that some of this, like these conversations are so important because we're showing there is a place for this conversation. There's a place for this in the church. And I think a lot of people isolate because they feel like they can't go and talk to someone because they are the only one. But I'm amazed, as I pointed to this earlier, every event I do, I usually will do an altar call for people who are struggling with depression. And I say, if you are struggling with depression, I want you to come to the front. Everyone's looking. I want you to be brave, and I want you to come to the front. There's this weird moment for about 4 seconds where nobody moves. And then one brave kid stands up, and then it's a flood to the altar. I mean, 50, 60, 70 kids struggling with it. And it's in that moment, it's one of my favorite moments because I have them look at each other and say, now look around. I said, you thought you were the only one, didn't you? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh no, now we're a family. Now we can fight together. Now it's been exposed that you're not alone. And so I think that moment where you can just find a faithful person to talk to. Now, here's what I've learned. I have to be able to go to someone who has either conquered it or just so I don't want to get with someone who's in the same situation as me. So I'm finding someone who can tell me, maybe a leader or someone who's walking in victory over it. And I'm going to them and I'm saying, hey, you got to pray for me. There's been multiple times, 2:30, 3:30 in the morning, I've sent out a text saying, hey, I can't sleep. Can you pray for me? And those people have always been faithful to call me in those moments. And you can tell they're sleeping, they're tired. And, but finding those people is so important and here's the thing, they're everywhere. So my advice to those people is pray and say, God, who is that person? And it would not surprise me by the end of the day, God highlights that person for you to go and talk to. We fight better together, right? One of my favorite sayings is if you want to kill giants, you got to hang out with giant killers. So that community part of it is important. Someone to oversee you, someone to pray for you, someone to be there just to talk to or just to listen.
Yeah. So. Yeah. I love that. We fight better together. That's so good. And recognizing that you're not alone. I'm working on an upcoming teaching series on mental health. And I wish I could quote for you where I found this, but I can't off the top of my head. But I read that over the course of a lifetime, 1 out of every 2 people will suffer with some form of mental illness. And at any given time, 1 out of every 3 teenagers is struggling with anxiety or depression. And you see this at your events that you preach at, just with the number of kids that you see that are brave enough to say that. And I say that to just let people know they are not alone. We have a saying here at Aldersgate, it's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to stay that way. And so can you speak to that for just a little bit in terms of people dealing with mental illness, anxiety, depression, like it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to be there in that place, but it's not okay to stay in that place. You alluded to that a little bit earlier. Can you elaborate on that a little bit for us?
Yeah, just going back to the whole Jesus wept verse. Jesus wept and he knew there's a resurrection fixing to happen. That blows my mind. He felt it in the moment. I think it's okay to feel. Like so many times I think we feel like we have to bottle it down. And this is a question that I'm having. Is there a place in church for true joy? Because I can go to a lot of churches and there's not an ounce of joy. But if we're saying come to church will fix you, and they're coming to these joyless places, I think joy is just such a powerful weapon that the church can have. But here's the thing, the church doesn't heal you. Jesus heals you. Yeah. And so being able to go through it, this is what I always tell people, it always gets better. This is when it happens in me, this is usually what happens whenever it comes on me and it's really hard for a couple days. I understand this, it's going to get better. And so my prayer is, I'm not feeling good today, but I'm going to feel better tomorrow. And if I wake up the next day and I'm still not feeling better, my prayer is I'm going to feel better. Because I've gone through it enough to know it ends. Like it really has an expiration date. But understanding I'm going to go through it. Sometimes some things I do that help is I take it a day at a time. Or if it's really bad, I take it hours at a time, thinking I've just got to make it to here and then we're going to start over. I'm going to make it to 12. Okay, I'm going to start over. Now I'm going to make it to 3. Okay, I'm going to start over. I used to do a thing. A lot of people know Kobe Bryant was my hero. And so no one ever knew why, though. So whenever Kobe passed, man, I was embarrassed at how much it messed me up. And
another part of this messed up year,
yeah,
right? 2020.
I know. But the reason I fell in love with Kobe so much was it was in those seasons where my depression was so hard, where I was suicidal and wanting just to end my life, that my goal was, if I can just make it to the next Kobe game, because Kobe was always on TV, and it was always late at night because they were on the West Coast. And so my goal was, okay, if I can just make it to then, that was my goal. So I felt like whenever he passed, it just brought up some of those things. I was so thankful for that. But finding things like that, I used to get excited for the weather to change. Just finding something to set a goal to get to. Movies, I'm a big movie. Okay, what movie's coming out this week? And those aren't things that, like I said, those things don't heal you, but those things help you. Finding ways to not isolate, but to get out in some form. Now, I'm a big introvert as well, so it's hard, or it's enticing to really get into the turtle shell and just leave it alone. But knowing what it's like to get around people, and maybe you're not even talking about it, but getting out and understanding like it does have an expiration date.
Oh, so good. Such good stuff. I'm going to pivot for a moment, if you're okay with this, and talk about the church's role here in helping people with mental illness. When you said earlier, talking about some churches you can't find joy there, it remind me of the church sign that I've seen that said, "Don't let worry kill you, let the church help."
Oh yeah.
So I think part of the reason, and I may be wrong about this, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think part of the reason people are hesitant to seek help is because there's such a stigma around depression, anxiety, just mental illness in general. And I think sometimes people feel like the church is the last place they would go to find help for that because of the church's history, whether this is true or not, but just terms of judgmentalism and judgment or criticism. You know where I'm going with this. So what would you say to the church in terms of how we can be the hands and feet of Jesus, or do what Jesus asked us to do with people who find themselves bound up in the oppression of anxiety and depression?
I think honesty is just such an important value to have. And here's what I mean. I grew up in a church where we always did greeting time. And so, hey, turn to your neighbor, extend the right hand of Christian fellowship, which always confused me. Like, what was the left hand if the right side? But that was the time you'd just walk around, you shake hands, and you would always ask this question. You'd say, how are you? And the answer was always, oh, I'm fine. And I was 14, 15, 16, starting to realize, like, wait a minute. Why is everyone fine? Like, I'm struggling. Like, I am in a deep, dark pit, but everyone else here is fine. And so that was like, okay, either they are fine and I'm really more jacked up than I thought, or they're liars. And then when I saw it modeled a little better was when people were honest, and they don't feel like they have to put that face or that mask on at church. They can let their guard down and say, man, I'm struggling. I am struggling. I think the importance of hearing the voice of God, and just how encouraging it is when someone says, man, I was praying for you the other night. I felt like God just wants you to know that he loves you. When we just start doing, instead of just coming and staying in our seat and in our comfort, but really being honest with people. I mean, you don't have to be prophetic to know someone's going through something. Lots of people, they don't hide it very well. You can look and say, man, something's off. Like, I don't know if you ever had a conversation, you were like, man, something's off there. Just getting with them and saying, hey, what can I do to help? But I think joy is so connected to the voice of God. That's why I love prophecy. I love giving words, because I know that when he's speaking, things change. And so just being real with people, I think the church could probably do a better job of that. Now, I don't think that we always, like I said, need to live there, but sometimes I want to hear a sermon about the valley, not the mountaintop. You know, we get those mountaintop sermons all the time, but sometimes like, what did you learn in this season of being in the valley of an honest struggle? Now, what I'm not saying is you get up there and like, hey, I'm struggling with cheating on my wife. Like that's not something so I think it comes from a place of victory, but just being able to come and talk about it and be honest about it, I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, and I think you're so right. In the church, we're not very open with one another, and I'm reminded of James' words that talk about healing coming through confession, but really being honest with people about where we're at and how we feel. But again, your words of we can't always live there. We've got to move through that. Yeah. It's okay to not be okay, but we can't stay that way. What would you say, since we're talking about stigma? What would you say? To the stigma, and we find this in the church sometimes because, well, God will heal you. God, you don't need, how does God work through medicine is what I'm trying to get at. And what would your words be on that?
Yeah, like I said, I think sometimes the medicine is a miracle. Like I there was a couple seasons where I just had to be on some meds just to get my balance. There's a whole science of being in balance and things like that. I think there is there are a group of people that view that as you're not having faith, and I think that is just absolutely absurd. I think that there is power in medicine. I think if you're responsible with it, right? You've seen it handled poorly, so obviously I'm not talking about that, but I think sometimes, man, I go to a doctor who prays over me before he. Like that's a rule, like with me and him. He said, I'm going to lay hands on you, pray over you. Love my doctor. But I understand there is that stigma. I just think, I prefer the miracle of, God healed me. But guess what? If that's not going to happen, there are things that I think God has put in our society to help us with that. But me, I'm the big, let me lay hands on you first. And that's why I love going to the doctor I go to, because he's the same way. He's like, listen, I'm like, do I still have to pay you if I do get healed? But I think that that there's that group of people. But I think if you need it, I don't think there's anything wrong with it.
I've heard you say several times during this conversation, you text your wife and she's going to pray for you, or you're up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. You text a friend, they're going to pray for you. Just elaborate more for us on the power of prayer when it comes to healing, and especially healing with anxiety, depression, these kind of things.
Yeah, I remember whenever I was really going through it, we had just made the move from La Mesa to Big Spring, and thankfully I have praying parents, right? I had praying grandparents. I remember vividly one night waking up, and I heard something, and I couldn't, it's dark room, I'm looking around. And I couldn't figure out what it was. And I looked on the ground, and my mom was on her knees just weeping and praying over me. And I can't tell you how many things that I was protected from because I had a praying mom. How many things that could have happened, but I was protected by prayer. And now I do the same thing with my kids. Going in there, I usually wait till they're asleep, and I just go in there and I just declare they're going to walk in protection, and they have a destiny. They have a purpose. They're the things that normal kids are going to struggle with. They're not. Now I understand they're going to have their struggles, but I want them to understand, man, things were declared over you. One of my kids may even have a demon right now. He's acting so strange, so he gets a little extra prayers in those seasons. But yeah, it's just that communication with God and watching how He intervenes because of someone else's prayer for you. That's such a blessing. That's such a powerful weapon.
Yeah, and I think it's such a word for all of us in the church, because sometimes our natural inclination is just to fix people, but perhaps our biggest role is just praying for people. Yeah. And praying that God would do His work in people, and not trying to be the counselor for everyone, or I guess is what I'm trying to get at. Man, I'm gonna ask you a really tough question, and you can punt if you want to. But what would you say to a parent who's been praying, or to a loved one who's been praying, and that loved one's suicide attempt was successful? What would you say to that person?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I think that there are some things I just don't understand, babies getting cancer, I don't get. I don't understand that. That's something that I have to go back into my prayer closet and say, God, why? Certain people getting cancer and dying. I'm like, yeah, but why them? We play that. Yeah, someone did commit suicide. Okay, so why did Nathan get intervened and my son didn't?
Right.
Here's what I do. I don't understand that, but here's what I do understand is God promises unexplainable joy in those situations. But unexplainable joy requires me to not need an explanation. And so there are times whenever, and it's so hard for me to speak on this because that wasn't my situation. So I don't want to come across as irreverent or anything like that. But I know that there is joy in those situations, that there are people surrounding those people in those situations that you can go to, you can talk to, but there's joy in that situation. Yeah, it's a hard one.
It is hard.
I'm gonna have to think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate your honesty with it because I think sometimes the best answer is I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, and I think in those situations you could give the best biblical theological answer and it'd be 100% perfect, but it doesn't. It's not going to change anything. No. I think that's the importance of mourning with those who mourn. You've been in a situation just like I have where you've had to go over to a house because a student has died, and there is that. You're sitting with the family and everyone's weeping. It's not the time to be like, well, let me tell you, here's 3 points on joy. Yeah. There is those situations. The only thing you can do is mourn. Yeah. The only thing you can do is sit and cry and hug and not try to explain. Yeah. I think that there's a season for that maybe down the road where you're going to be able to say, hey, like, here, let me tell you this. But man, there's power in just knowing I'm here.
Yeah. One of the reasons we invited you in to share your story, Nathan, is because you are a preacher, and now you're a pastor too, because we got you as a college pastor. And I think sometimes people look at other people and go, well, they're immune from this, or certainly they don't struggle with this. And so, again, I really appreciate you being willing to share your story and your journey with this and your struggle with this, because I think it's important for us to note no one is immune from this. I mean, it's just, it's again one of those answers. We don't know why some people struggle with this and some people don't. We know that we all struggle with different things, and unfortunately, this is just. It's like you said earlier. This never comes from God. This is of the devil, and we live in a broken world, and so we deal with broken things and brokenness. But what would you say to someone who may be listening and they're at that place where you were at as a 13-year-old boy? What would you say to them?
I just remember, September 11th, remembering the feeling of I wasn't important. I didn't know who I was. And so everything kind of changed. I think that's why I'm able to fight it better now, because I know who I am. I didn't know who I was then. But I remember thinking my story was over. Now I'm going to say something. This isn't to brag on me at all, but it's part of what I'm going to go back to. In 5 years of traveling, I've been able to see over 3,000 students give their lives to Jesus. Yeah. What's interesting about that is on September 11th, I thought my story was over. But really inside me, I had 3,000 other stories that needed to be told.
Right. Wow.
And so there's something in, if I'm talking to that person, I'm telling them, hey, there's something in you that you don't even know. There's something within you. You have a gift. You have something in you that is valuable and that society needs, maybe the church needs, maybe businesses need, but there's something within you that's important and valuable. It always is going to get better. I think of the story in Acts 16 with the jailer. His one job was to keep everyone in the prison, and he woke up and thought everyone had left, and he was going to kill himself. And Paul says something in there. He says, no, we're all here. And it says the next thing they did was the jailer turned the light on. I think for some of us, we've just been viewing some things in the dark, and some of us have not let the Holy Spirit come and light it up, the Holy Spirit to come and expose some things. But we're sitting in this dark cell thinking we're all alone, and there's tons of people in there with us. There's tons of people there, but there's something valuable in you. don't throw it away.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, we could do a whole nother podcast on what you just talked about. I mean, just the jeller and the sale. I mean, and that's the bottom line really, is just bringing it into the light. And number one, first of all, I mean, Jesus is the light. We can't conquer this without Jesus. I mean, I'm sure you would amen that.
Yeah.
I mean, and second of all, we can't conquer it if we're not willing to bring it into the light and to talk to someone and let someone know where we're at. And man, I would just encourage you, if you are listening or watching, and that is the place that you're in, man, just reach out to us. We'd love to visit with you, have a conversation with you. I know I'm offering Nathan up, but I know he would love to visit with you as well. And don't sit in that place, but please reach out to us and let us know. What else? What else would you add? Anything? Last comments that you'd like to talk about or throw out on the table? Or
I just think there's just a place in church for joy. Joy is such a powerful gift, even in worship. You know, I don't know if you've ever gone to services where you're like, you don't even believe what you're singing. You know, but just that, and I'm not talking about you have to, because I've seen people jump around too, and they're just, and so, but true joy is found in Jesus. I'm not against happiness. There's tons of things that make me happy. I'm so thankful for happiness, but happiness fades so quick, especially when you're wired like I am. It's always the next thing. Getting the next thing, or going to the next stage, or doing the next thing. That's the pursuit of happiness. But joy is a person, and he lives in you. He's in the storm with you, right? He didn't send them to a storm by themselves. Here he comes walking on the water, right? He's in the valley of death with you. Understanding that Jesus feels like I'm so thankful that we serve a God that doesn't understand how I'm feeling. He's in it with me. But that's I think the big takeaway, and what I go back to when I go through those seasons. Now, like I said, I don't struggle with it anymore. I fight it. And I think there's a big difference. I've learned how to fight. I've learned those things to do to help me get through it. But man, understanding that we serve a God that's there with us. That is my biggest takeaway, and the reason why I know I can get through it is because he's with me.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, Nathan, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing your story with us and sharing your thoughts with us. Man, there's so much you laid out on the table today, so many nuggets. Like I said, we could probably have 3 or 4 more podcasts just taking a nugget or two that you said. But so many things, and I know, again, like I said, the seeds you planted here today are gonna sprout and grow in a lot of people's lives. And again, I want to make a plea to anybody who's listening or watching. Man, if you are struggling with anxiety, depression, any other form of mental illness, anything for that regard, don't keep it to yourself. Reach out, let someone know, talk to someone, let us know. We'd love to visit with you about that. And we'd love to be a church that helps you find joy as well, find that person of Jesus and joy in that and what that means. And so please reach out to us if you need to. And with that, we'll close this podcast. So again, Nathan, thank you so much. Man, we are so blessed to have you on board as staff here, and want to continue to pray and uplift your ministry as well. Thank you for tuning in. Again, everything that's expressed here doesn't necessarily mean that's what I believe or what the church here believes, but we do believe in joy, and we do believe in the person Jesus that brings us joy, and believe the church should be a place of joy. And just want to remind you too, as we sign off, that we may not all think alike, but we can all love alike. And so until next time.